You're listening to Vantage Revival. Please enjoy this encore presentation of Season 1, Episode 13, Interview with the Cannibal, Armin Meiwes, originally uploaded October 3rd, 2021. Today we watch a television documentary on one of Germany's most infamous cases of cannibalism. In March 2001, Armin Meiwes met a man from online and then ate him alive, shocking the world. Interview with the Cannibal, Armin Meiwes, now playing on Vantage Revival. So I want to start with saying, if you have not listened to our podcast this Tuesday for Grim Love or our Friday one for Cannibal, you probably should before listening to this Doc Sunday podcast.
I'm going to follow that up by saying we should have watched this movie first.
See, okay, why?
Because I was actually interested in this, and then looking back at the movies, I probably would have rated them higher seeing this one.
That's fair. I think I went into it with the order that we did. A, based off the week schedule that we have.
Yes.
And B, I had seen Grim Love first, and then I saw the documentary, and then I saw Cannibal. So I saw them in a weird order to begin with. So with that then, what would you change about your reviews for Grim Love and Cannibal based off the information of this documentary?
Looking back on it, hearing from him himself, how his name is
Armin Meiwes.
Hearing from Armin himself, I feel like it changed it didn't even change my opinion on the movies. It just made the movie seem more interesting now that I know the story from him. And like I said, it's not like I saw the videos, it's not like anything, but it was told in a way where I knew what was real in the movies. I knew what was not real. There's obviously a lot of things that I think we both know from the documentary that we can look back at the movies and go, okay, yep, that was something that did actually happen. And I think that made the movie seem a bit better to me in my head. I don't know exactly what category I would up for it. It's just, if I seen this documentary before I watched the movies, I feel like I would have enjoyed the movies a little bit more so the Hollywood depiction.
I actually think the Hollywood one, looking back on this now, was more truthful.
Yes.
To what happened.
I agree. There was a lot of things. Obviously, I was writing down all the things that I saw that were similar, and I found for the most part, I was writing down that, oh, this was more like the Hollywood movie. This was more like the Hollywood movie. So that's actually crazy. And we talked about in the Friday podcast that they got a really attractive man to portray
in Grim Love.
In Grim Love. But I find that they did a very good job of matching the character to Brandis, the real victim. They did an amazing job with it. So it would have changed my opinion completely going into it documentary first, seeing the faces, knowing the people, and then watching the movies and seeing how close they were to reality. That would have made me feel better about those movies. But we watched them in such a weird order that it made me not enjoy the movies as much.
But I also think that people watching it back in the day, they would have watched the movie first. I don't think the case was as public. There was so much secrecy about what happened that I think people's first exposure was these movies. And later on, because this documentary came out after both movies came out, so viewers didn't have the insight that we got today with this documentary. So you did kind of see it, and it was judged based off people's opinion of the movies. And for that reason, neither one of the movies got very good reviews. They're not super popular. They're hard to find because of their content. But in a very similar manner, now knowing what you know and how truthful they both are in different ways, they are better movies because they were trying to recreate what actually happened. And I feel that Grim Love did that with especially the backstories of them, focusing on the parents and the mother's suicide. And Armin's character in Grim Love, he had that connection with his mother and overbearingness. Like, that stuff is all accurate to what happened. Whereas in Cannibal, because they have no backstories, the location was a lot more real. It was set in Germany, and the house was closer resembling to what actually was their house. The violence, for lack of a better term, I think was more accurate in Cannibal as well. So kind of what we said on Friday is if both movies were put together in a certain way, they would have been a much better movie together. And I think if they had been, they also would have been truer to the actual story that we found out in this documentary.
Yes. And so if you remember back to when we watched The American Murderer, you said that you don't want to do research before watching a movie to have to understand it. It seems like I'm backwards, where I fall into I'd love to get all the research I can done, watch all the real shit, watch all the documentaries, all that stuff before seeing the movie, because to me it makes it a better movie. And this trio that you made me watch here is proof of that I like the research part, whereas you don't.
Not that I don't like the research, but you're right. We are opposite in that sense, that I like the fantasy and what people can create from a story. And I don't need the full picture or the true picture to enjoy a work of art. And that's how I saw the two movies, is that they are artistic in their own ways. Grimlove is obviously very well shot. He has good actors in it. It has this level of sadness to it. And then there's Cannibal, where it's gritty, it's dark, it's animalistic, and that is a positive for that movie. And then we have the documentary, really tying together the truth of what happened. And there were a couple things that I found, shocking in this documentary that weren't necessarily touched upon either movie. One being that Armin was really, it is kind of touched upon as a lie, but he was really normal. Yes. Armin is a really normal man. Mm-hmm. And everyone who is involved in his life would say that. And they did say that in this documentary, that they would never assume this was him. And I think that that's true to most people. I think that we all carry our past, or we carry secrets, or we carry things that we may want that we don't want to share with others. And unfortunately, his was a very dark urging that he kept to himself. And there was something that I thought was really interesting. They interviewed one of his friends, one of his adult friends. Her name is Nicole. And they asked her, just give your opinion of him. Like, do you trust him? And she said, along the lines of, I did trust him. I never thought he would do this, but I did trust him. And I have 4 children. He spent time with all 4 of my children. And I would never think that he would eat another person. And then she said that even after all this, she would still trust him to be with her children. And I thought that was really important for someone to say, because I don't think that someone doing a bad thing necessarily makes them a bad person, or that they are only evil.
And they're a danger to everybody.
Yeah, and it's said many times, even outside of Nicole, that he is not a threat to the general population. He's not a threat to really anyone. He is only a threat to the people who are willing to feed into this fantasy that they are living. That he is not just going to walk down the street and kidnap someone and then eat them. That's not who he is. And I think that with a lot of murders, a lot of true crime situations, people don't look past that. They see someone as a murderer and they don't see them as a human being. And I'm not saying that there are murders that should be looked at as not as bad as they are, because there's some truly horrendous murders out there. But they're still a person when it comes down to the end of the day. Something made them that way. And I don't think we do enough looking at that. We just look at what they did. And it's just like, yes, what they did was horrible, but what made them horrible? That's the real question of anything. What made this person do this?
I kind of have a story that could go along with this. I knew somebody and they were arrested for doing some unspeakable things to a cat. And this person went to jail and got out of jail. They were still my friend after. I still went to karaoke with them. I would still see them. And I feel like whenever I tell people the story of what this person did, they always question me as to why I remained their friend after. And I look at it in the same way that this Nicole girl looked at it. It was a lapse in judgment. It was something that they did and they made mistakes, but they've never done anything to, they're not a danger to society. They've never done me wrong. They've never done anyone I know wrong. And they were my friend before and they continued. I don't talk to them anymore, but they continued to be my friend for a few years after. And the friendship fizzled out because I moved on to bigger and better things with my life. But, what they didn't have, I don't know how to say this. Like I say, a lot of people would be like, why are you defending this person? I'm not defending what this person did. I'm defending the fact that this person is still a human being and they treated me fairly and with respect. And I knew that this person wasn't gonna murder me or try and eat me. So I was still friends with them. So I agree with this Nicole girl. If he's doing things out of fantasy and he's not a threat to her or her children, then I'm 100% with her that she trusts him.
It was also interesting that they didn't have very many people speaking on behalf of Brandis in this documentary, who is the man that was eaten, other than the prostitute that he had slept with numerous times and originally had asked him to bite and cut off his penis, and that prostitute refused. Because I was curious if Brandis had a bigger story, because yes, they talk about his mother committing suicide, but it takes a lot, I think, to wanting to be eaten. And I wonder if that is because he was so ashamed of being gay, and if him being eaten was him completing like a life cycle and he could live within someone else. Because that's what Armin said at the very beginning of this documentary, is that he is always with me. And I think maybe that's what Brandis wanted, was to not live as a gay man anymore, but to still fulfill himself as a gay man within someone else.
And I've thought about that kind of in a different way. I thought about it as maybe he was transgender, with wanting his penis cut off and already being unaccepted as a gay man. You know, let's just make assumptions here. I'm sure that as coming out as transgender would be even more horrific for his family, which they mentioned his family did not support or accept him for being gay. And there's a quote that someone said, and it said both of them were being loved for the way that they thought that their parents thought they should be, and not for who they are.
Right.
And that stood out to me because I've been so lucky with coming out and different things that I've gone through with my family accepting me. You've never really told me, and if you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to, how your family was about your coming out, and if it did have an impact on you.
I think that I thought it was going to have an impact. You have to understand that growing up gay, growing up confused is probably a better way to go about it, because I didn't know that I was gay until much later on in my life. And by that I mean I was an older teenager. I was exposed to a lot of movies, TV shows, and whatnot. And in those stories, they're usually very tragic, dramatic. The family abandons you. You have to leave and live with your lover. And that does happen to some people. And I thought that was going to be me as well, because that's what I was seeing. And like, there's no happy stories where a gay person's accepted by everyone in their family. And I have to say that when it was revealed, I was very lucky that everyone in my family was pretty much open to it, and they were very understanding. My mother, I don't want to say she didn't. She said that she needed some time to think about it, and I felt it was very her just wanting to be dramatic because of the things that she'd seen on movies and TV shows. Because me being gay doesn't affect their lives, really. So, yeah, I expected it to be way more dramatic than it was. And it was very calm, very easy.
At a point in the movie, it's mentioned that he was engaged to a woman. And
Petra.
I'm curious about that. They never really talk about his sexuality. I don't think they ever mention that he's gay. I
don't think he ever admits it. I think it's kind of obvious that he is somebody who is potentially gay, and I think he just really wanted to please his mother, so that was never an option to even say those words out loud, which is why he went to the military. He was there for 12 years. You're surrounded by men. He felt comfortable there, and then his mother is expecting him to come back with this woman, which he does with Petra, and it's not going to work out because he doesn't want to be with the woman. And I think he does say that in that movie, that he doesn't want to be with the woman, and they're not good enough for his mother. I don't think he can verbalize that he is sexual towards men, but even when they're talking about the sex they did have, he says that it was Brandis that wanted it. He didn't have an urge to have sex. So maybe he doesn't even want to have sex, so to speak. He just wants that man to be around.
Well, they do mention that the killing and the sex and the cutting off the penis was none of Armin's decision or want or fantasy, that was all Armin fulfilling Brandis's fantasy.
Which I was kind of confused about, because obviously Armin wants to eat flesh and get flesh.
Mm-hmm.
How would that not involve killing someone minimum? I think you knew that you can't just cut off someone's pieces and hope they'll be okay.
Yeah.
I don't know how or why he kept saying that wasn't his fantasy, or he didn't want to do that. What was his fantasy then? It wasn't clear to me what his end goal was if he didn't want to eat the penis.
And that definitely confused me too. But that also made me think that the person who portrayed him in both of the movies that we watched was inaccurate. Like I mentioned on Friday, I felt like the character, the man in that movie, the man in that movie was connected and was attached to even the corpse of the flesh. Whereas even in the documentary, it says that he put him in the bathtub and then he left, where it seems to be portrayed that he stayed with him and was connected to him. And that's not the case. He left and he was just reading a book on his bed.
He was reading a Star Trek book.
Yeah.
I didn't remember this part of the documentary, but I was also shocked how disconnected he was from the experience.
Mm-hmm.
He left him alone for like hours at a time and would just visit every 15 minutes to see if he was still alive. Like, it wasn't clear what he wanted because he wasn't a part of it, really. And you're right, the movies make it very romantic, and I'm here for you, and we're in this together. And that is not how it seems to be by the detectives and Armin himself confirming that he was just waiting for him to die because he didn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And which, that totally makes sense, because this is not his plan. He has no idea what's going to happen next, and he can't help him going further. And Brandis wants to continue this process, but neither one know what they're doing, and so he just waited. And it takes away that romantic side that these movies really brought forward. Even the documentary at the beginning kind of mentioned that it was this like grotesque love or something.
Mm-hmm.
There was no love in this.
No.
This was very much...
It was two men helping each other fulfill a fantasy.
It was very much like a contract agreement. Mm-hmm. This is what's going to happen. This is what we're going to do. The end. Mm-hmm. He even said that he kissed him in the tub because he thought that might help him feel better. Not because he wanted to, not because they were being sexual, he just thought it might help. And even the part with the tub, in both movies, the man, he helps him out and carries him through the house. But Armin says, like, nope, Brandis got up himself, I did not help him, and then he passed out and I dragged him through the house. It's very not romantic. So I was surprised they chose that angle. I get it, because watching, especially Grim Love, for me, the emotion's there, and if there wasn't that romance to it, it'd be much colder of a movie.
Oh, 100%.
It would just be two men cutting off pieces and eating it.
Exactly, but that's what it was.
That's exactly what it was. One of your negatives for Grim Love was the imaginary friend.
Yes.
Which turns out was a real thing, according to Armin, that he wanted a little brother growing up and did not get that because his mom was quite old. And he had an imaginary little brother and he wanted to eat him. And that's
to feel connected to him.
To feel connected, and that is kind of the starting point that he admits to of creating these fantasies. Another thing that you brought up in Grim Love too that you've kind of was confused about was when he asked for forgiveness. At the end, you're like, why is he asking for forgiveness? Like, this guy volunteered to do it. What are you asking forgiveness for? In the documentary, it explained that he was literally asking God, or the devil, he didn't know who to pray to, forgiveness for what was about to happen, and that was him ultimately murdering the guy to end the suffering that he had been feeling for the hours that this was going on for. And I was shocked by that too, is that in the court case, the jurors only saw 19 minutes out of 4 hours of footage.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't stomach anything past those 19 minutes. It's crazy to think that you could have so much footage with only one person. Like, what did these men go through that night? Both of them, because it clearly wasn't easy for either one of them.
What I noticed and what I think the 4 hours were, and that's why I don't necessarily love the fact that he is in prison, because I don't think he's a bad person, but I noticed that it was probably 4 hours of Armin trying to fulfill Brandis's fantasy before he could fulfill his own. But I found that with what he was saying is that one of the detectives or whoever mentions in the documentary that he was just a sick man who used this guy to fill out a sexual fantasy. And I saw that as being completely opposite based on what Armin explained, because I feel like he was doing everything in his power to make Brandis happy. He wasn't using him as a pawn. He was following everything that Brandis was telling him to do.
And the footage showed that, like when the penis got cut off, after the 30 seconds of that excruciating pain, he looked down at the fountain of blood coming out of him and he was smiling and happy. And that is shown on the video footage that Brandis was getting what he wanted. This was never forced upon him, and it was done for his satisfaction.
100%. And to only show 19 minutes of what could have been a lot of portrayal of
just the murder and the graphics of that.
Yeah, it could have been shown that I really do not think that Armin belongs in prison. I mean, maybe he shouldn't be allowed internet, but that at best, that should be kind of where he's at. I maybe agree with the manslaughter sentence that he was given.
Well, here's the thing too. In Germany, there is no cannibal law, and it was also declared that he had a willing victim. So with that, it almost sounds like there shouldn't be any jail time. It should be some sort of therapy, a group house maybe, just as a voluntary watching system. But you're right, he got 8 years based off the no cannibal law on the willing victim, but then they appealed it and he got a lifetime in jail, and he will now die in jail for something that was two individuals agreeing to something that only affected the two of them.
It only negatively affected Brandis because he's dead.
Which is
but
what
that's
he
what
wanted.
he wanted. So really, at the end of the day, it didn't affect anybody because Brandis got what he wanted and Armin got what he wanted.
The only person it might have affected was Brandis' boyfriend.
Yes. Instead of killing himself, Brandis went out in a way that he wanted to make him happy. It was his last final hurrah in the world to make him happy. And I feel like that's important. And yeah, it's sad. They say that Armin is in a high security prison. It is the most low security, high security prison I think I've ever seen in my life. Dudes walking around. There's no guards. Every time I've ever seen anybody in a high security prison interview, they've had 4 guards shackled up. This guy's walking around getting a vending machine coffee. So I don't think he's living life too horribly in prison, but I don't think he belongs there still.
Completely. And it's been proven with many studies that European prisons are some of the most high-end ones you can be in. They're not like the ones you find in the States or in Canada. I'm very thankful that he is in a prison where he does have that freedom, because he does not, in my opinion, either deserve to be locked up for the rest of his life for something that he has to carry anyways, and was never ever a vicious act.
So, and my confusion with it too is they said that they re-watched some of the video and realized that Brandis was alive when Armin cut the throat, and that is what changed it to a murder conviction instead of a manslaughter conviction. Regardless, Armin was the one who took the knife and cut a limb off of a person, which inevitably killed him or would have killed him. So I don't think whether it was cutting the penis off and waiting for him to take his last breath, or cutting his penis off, him being virtually deceased and then slitting his throat, I don't really see it making that much of a difference, because I don't see what the difference was and how that changed the verdict from 8 years to life.
I think there was people that were very angry with that outcome, because again, when people are very judgmental in any sort of case, even non-criminal, and when people don't get what they want, they fight back. And so I think there was a level of appeasing that was done to that area, and I think people who were not a part of the case or knew him did think he was this crazy cannibal. I go back to our Feed podcast That clip shows a crazy man biting off a penis.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people thought. When they heard about this case, they read that article, crazy cannibal eats man alive. Oh my God, he must be dangerous. And when people see, oh, he's going to be out in 8 years, he might eat me. I don't like that. I think that was enough for whoever filed the appeal to go, no, this man is dangerous. Look, he actually did kill him. He was still alive when he slit his throat. That was never a part of the deal. He's dangerous. Obviously, watching this, you can see that he is not dangerous. And even at the very end, after being in jail, he does say that he does regret what he did. He realizes that you don't have to live out every fantasy you have. You don't have to find fulfillment in things that you think you need. And this boils down to, again, that he doesn't know himself. And I think that's him potentially fighting his gay side, potentially not wanting his family to know that he was gay, and still to this day not admitting it. So he wants forgiveness for what he did. And unfortunately, he has to forgive himself. He's not going to get that from anyone else because they locked him up for the rest of his life.
Exactly, and there's no changing that conviction anymore.
So like all of our podcasts, we do a scoring point system at the end. We do 5 categories with a max of 3 points per category. And the first one is the edge of seat rating. Did this documentary keep us entertained? I
gave it a 3. This definitely kept me entertained. I enjoyed this very much. Of the 3 movies, you were getting mad at me for scoring the movie so low. All you get to do is show me the real shit. I was in. 3.
I also gave it a 3. I've only seen this documentary once, and I remember being on a very similar page of he doesn't deserve this. And rewatching it now, I still feel that way. He does not deserve this. And I hope other people can open their hearts and minds that people aren't just evil based off one thing they've done their entire life. Mm-hmm. Next, we have the originality. Was this movie original?
I gave it a 2. It's a basic documentary. It's the same as any other documentary style. I can't give it a 1 because it's not like it's done horribly, but I can't give it a 3 because it's not anything special either.
I also gave it a 2. I think that because there's so much they won't let us see, that holds it back from really pushing the envelope of what a documentary can be. But I do love the fact that he actually said yes to this documentary.
100%, yeah.
And they also had access to his family home, which was the first time that has ever been shown on camera as well.
That was really cool.
So I gave it a 2 because I do wish they had shown maybe a court scene or something. It's a generic documentary, but with a really powerful story.
100%.
So next we have the climax and ending. What's your score?
I gave it a 2.5. I kind of feel that edge of seat and climax and ending kind of go hand in hand. It's following through on the edge of seat and it's finishing everything up. I felt like I finally got the ending that I was wanting. I was wanting to hear sentencing. I was wanting to hear, exactly what happened that landed him in jail. Obviously, throughout the whole documentary, you're hearing from lawyers and friends and everything it kept me engaged, and I finally got the ending I wanted. I'm not going to say that it was perfect, so that's why it was docked half a point, but it still was the ending I wanted.
I gave it a 2 because I felt the ending was really abrupt. It was just like the end, and I was like, oh, okay. They do wrap it up nicely. You do kind of hear the sentencing, and there's no unanswered questions. Everything is pretty well rounded. I don't know what would have given it a top score, but the abruptness of just the end, it came out of nowhere for me, so it got a 2. Next is the script/flow of the documentary.
I gave it a 2. There was a few times that it's almost like I was expecting more things to be said and it was cut to a different clip. Like there would be Armin giving an interview and he would kind of start saying something interesting and then it would just cut to his family home and his lawyer talking. So I found that there was a few abrupt places in there, but the flow of the storyline that it took, the linear way that it took, all that worked for me, so I gave it a 2.
I also gave it a 2, mostly because I felt there were a few interviews that weren't needed. One being the author of the book of what happened.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, he kind of just pointed out the obvious, and we would just have a scene with the lawyer and Armin who would explain a portion of the night, and then we'd go to the guy who wrote the book, and he would also explain the same portion of the night. It just wasn't needed, in my opinion. So I think if there had been some trimming of who was telling the story, it would have made it a little bit better. I wish that there was more Armin. I felt like he is the one, this is his story. And I think that he could have, and maybe he did, we don't know what made the cutting room floor, but I think he could have went further into the details of what happened that night. It was 4 hours long. He also was reading a book for a portion of that, so who knows how detailed he really was that night. Maybe he wasn't there for most of it, so maybe everything he said was everything. But for that reason, I gave it a 2. And lastly, would you watch this again?
I gave it a 3.
I see what you did there. And why is that?
This is a true crime documentary. This is the type of shit that I'm into. I am kind of weird. As soon as true crime, there's not a lot of true crime out there when you're a girl like me who watches it all day, every day. So I've seen most true crime documentaries at least 4 or 5 times, at least. So this will be something that could fall onto my radar of something that I watch again and again and again.
That's awesome. I gave it a 2. And that is because I'm one of those people where once I've seen something, especially when it comes to a real crime, I don't get much out of it.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Second or third time around. So because of that, I've seen it twice now. And even though I still enjoyed it, outside of maybe introducing the story to someone else again, I wouldn't feel the need to watch this documentary again. With that, my grand score was 11.
And mine was 12.5.
So that is 23.5.
Number 4, Hairspray with 25 points. Number 3, Urban Legend with 25.5 points. Number 1, tied, is Bowling for Columbine and Catch Me If You Can.
I like how the list constantly is moving every single week.
Always moving. Nothing stays.
Let's see if that number 1 spot can be broken though.
It's a high score.
Till next week. Thanks for listening to Vantage Revival.